Well, that's right, except, I mean, Jim Chalmers came out and gave his wrap-up speech, talked about intergenerational gap. I'd like to get your explanation about what that might not be. But if the budget is in such a state that they need to get income from somewhere, I mean, Albanese will probably be convinced, won't he? I mean, the key quote for me, Saul, was when Chalmers said, well, any of these changes will be discussed by Cabinet. Doesn't that leave it open to a Cabinet decision to go, sorry, Albo, we're actually going to do this?
Well, yes, of course. In theory, Cabinet can make any decision that a majority of Cabinet members are willing to make. But it's pretty unusual for Cabinet members to overrule the Prime Minister, who is, first among equals, if you like, who occasionally makes captain's calls. It's pretty unusual for Cabinet to overrule the Prime Minister when he has been as explicit as Mr Albanese has been, that they're not going to make any tax changes in the current term other than the ones that they talked about before the most recent federal election. As I say, I think Jim Chalmers has got licence from this week's roundtable to talk about and maybe to argue the case for taking bigger tax reforms to the next election, in much the same way as when John Howard was first elected in 1996, he said there'd never ever be a GST under his government. And then during his first term, he was persuaded that there should be one. But rather than introducing it in his first term, he went to the people arguing the case for one. The people accepted that narrowly. He then introduced a GST. And because he had a budget surplus to draw on at the time, he was able legitimately to say that the tax reform that his government introduced in 2000 made everyone better off. The current problem is, of course, that we've got federal budget deficits now as far as the eye can see, and it's simply not possible to do tax reform in a way that makes everyone better off. Some people are going to be worse off, and the government has to make political calculations as to who they're going to be. They're probably going to be people who are not natural Labor voters, or perhaps people such as in the ACT, who are always going to vote Labor no matter what the government of the day the government does. The other thing that I think is seared into Mr Albanese's experience, of course, is that he was part of a government led by Julia Gillard that in the 2010 election said there'd never be a carbon tax under a government which she led. The government then, under Julia Gillard, under pressure from the Greens, introduced a carbon tax, and that enabled Tony Abbott to launch a devastatingly effective campaign against that government, which cost the Labor government in 2013. And I think Mr Albanese doesn't want to repeat that experience. So even though perhaps Jim Chalmers might like to do more on the tax front between now and the 2028 election, Mr Albanese isn't going to let him do that. He will have to argue the case, put it to the people at the 2028 election, and given how big their majority currently is, there's probably a better than even chance that they will win it, but they will win it being able to claim, just as John Howard could in 1998, that he's got a mandate to make tax changes that he has talked about in the lead up to that election.
So when you step back and you bring all of your years of knowledge and look at the economy in general, how pessimistic are you about the shape it is in?
Well, it's in better shape than it was a year or two ago. And the reason I say that is that inflation, which, less than 3 years ago was unacceptably high, peaking at 7.8%, even 18 months ago was still running at close to 4%, is now just about at the midpoint of the Reserve Bank's target band of 2.5%. We've done that with a very small increase in the unemployment rate of less than a percentage point. Our peers in Canada and New Zealand have brought inflation down, but at a much higher price in terms of unemployment rising by almost 2 percentage points over that period, and with even weaker economic growth than Australia has had during that period. If you look at past episodes of high inflation in the early 80s or the early 1990s, we got inflation down from over 10% per annum in both of those occasions, but at the price of pushing the unemployment rate above 10%. So, we're turning the corner. Growth is slow. The biggest challenge I think we face at the moment is, as this summit this week, this roundtable this week was seeking to address, is our pretty appalling record on productivity growth, which is, every galah in the pet shop says is the only sustainable source of improvements in national and individual
Yes.
living standards over long periods of time. That's something that we need to be making some hard decisions about. This week's roundtable perhaps will speed up making some relatively small decisions on things that have been around for a long time, like red tape surrounding the building industry and the recognition of occupational licensing across different state borders and so forth. If that can be sped up, they're small steps, but they're steps in the right direction. Bigger reforms are obviously going to have to wait until after the next election.
Yeah, well, I like your glass half full attitude, Saul, always. Thank you very much for helping us out tonight.